And the sound begins, if only we had a machine to hear it. The Sound Machine by Roald Dahl coming up for discussion today.
The hills are alive with the sound machine.
All right, so this was published 1949, The New Yorker, right? And we've read several Roald Dahl stories. I'll tell you what, I really enjoyed this story. Like this just flowed. It was very easy to read, and there's almost kind of like a rhythm to it. What did you think of the story?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. I guess just knowing Roald Dahl, I felt a little bit not let down. I guess lackluster, let down at the ending because I was expecting, I guess maybe that wow surprise that I know that he usually introduces at some point. And I guess it's there depending really how you interpret the ending. And you know me, I went pessimistic, but I wanted to be optimistic.
Well, I wonder what your pessimistic is, because when I was looking at this, I thought there was like a couple different ways to kind of interpret it, like any story, but at least I picked up on a couple this time. And I'm kind of curious which route you went, because a lot of times when we talk, you tend to go the religious route. Right. And I'm kind of curious, are you going down that path today, or which path are you headed down with this story?
I did not choose the religious path. In this time, I went more of man versus nature.
Well, we'll get into it because I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. So let's just say what we see in different ways and perspectives to share. How about that?
Fair enough.
So our main character, Klausner, that's what I'm going to pronounce him as. He heads to a shed where there's this big black box 3 feet long in the shape of a child's coffin. And I thought that was just a really interesting way to describe the sound machine as a child's coffin, which was interesting. And he's expecting to meet Dr. Scott, essentially. Klausner sighed and clasped his hands together tightly. "I believe," he said, speaking more slowly now, "that there is a whole world of sound about us all the time that we cannot hear." Right? And then he goes on to describe the invisible, the stuff that we can't see. It's imperceivable, but it's beautiful. And he's found a way to tap into it. Where did your mind go to begin with this premise?
It did go the kind of the religious route, I'll be honest. And I thought, okay, is this...
I thought you said it did. But now you're going there.
No, my initial thought was, okay, we have the coffin, that's death. The way they describe Klausner is he almost is like death himself. You know, he's kind of frail looking. And I thought, okay, are we going some type of religious route here? He's death. He's encompassing death. He's speaking to the dead. Maybe that's what the sound machine does. Is it allows him to speak to ghosts? That's where I kind of thought it was going. So I thought, okay, maybe this is a religious route. But then as we move into the story and he's not talking to ghosts, then I kind of dismissed that.
Well, we had that story, the La Orla by Guy de Maupassant, where you raise the question of how do you detect the undetectable, right? There's even like a little bit of a joke, I think, unless I've totally botched this, but they talk about like the F sharp, which I remember from a Simpsons episode. If you look at a scale, the F sharp doesn't exist. It's just G, I believe, right? So it's kind of like how do you perceive the imperceptible, or is it renamed something else, right? So how do you hear these things that you can't hear? And, you know, if you go back to our old school days, you know, well, wow, the sun rotates around us, right? We can only hear what we can hear. Dogs couldn't possibly hear noises that we can't hear. Science has brought us a long way of challenging us to say, hey, I can't detect this with my senses, right? I have 5 senses. I trust in them. They're my gateway into understanding this world. But we start to understand through logic and this higher processing in human beings, a gift that we have as human beings that, as far as we know, doesn't exist in a lot of other creatures, that there are things that we can't detect. There are hidden gears behind the scene that makes this world tick. And just because you don't know about them or you haven't discovered them yet, doesn't mean that they don't exist.
Yeah, I was really disappointed in the doctor because of this scientific thought process, because Klausner is going to what I assume he thinks is somebody that will believe him or will maybe investigate this with him as a scientist, is the doctor. And he's trying to tell the doctor of you know, kind of what he feel like he's discovered. And maybe the doctor is obviously seeing Klausner and knows him very well, and is interpreting his action as something that's irrational, that, his mental state is off. And that's really kind of disappointing, but kind of encouraging as well, that the doctor evaluates how Klausner is mentally and physically at the same time, and thinks that maybe, he's kind of, quote, off his rocker a little bit. But then Klausner seems to be going through this rationally, and the doctor still won't trust him, believe him. His scientific mind never kicks on to say, oh, well, we thought blood was blue, before it became oxidized, and then doctors and scientists figured out that it wasn't, or something, for example. So yeah, that was kind of disappointing to me as the story kind of unfolds. Is I feel like the doctor is the antagonist almost to the story.
That's interesting. So I had a different view of the roles. You know what? I agree and disagree, because I agree that he's in some sense the antagonist, because he opposes Klausner's view. Klausner is, I don't want to say optimistic, I don't want to say the idealistic person, but he is open to what's out there that I don't know.
Yeah, the wonder of life.
There's knowledge out there I haven't obtained, right? But the doctor is the scientist, right? He needs to measure it. It needs to be provable. And he's the stereotypical person that just doesn't believe in something that he can't manifest in reality in some way, whether that be through logical understanding or through physical measurement. It's kind of how I viewed it.
Okay, so I guess then there's two types of scientists. Is that Klausner is one type of scientist with wonder and awe, and the doctor is another type of scientist that is all about proof. The thing is, I think that
I like that.
They can meet in the middle somewhere, and I think that's where we see scientific breakthroughs. Is you have the wanderer and you have the proofer, and I feel like the doctor isn't holding up his end of the bargain of being the proofer, where Klausner has done everything that he can to try to prove this to the doctor. Because as the story unfolds, he is trying to prove it to the doctor that this sound machine is allowing him to perceive nature beyond what human ears can comprehend. And the doctor's like, "Nah, I just think you're going crazy."
I love that. I love how you challenged me there, because when I first looked at the story, and it's not wrong to look at it this way, I viewed it as like experience versus like science or measurement. And I like your idea of it being two different forms of a hypothesis and how do you test it, right? Because you raise a good point that the doctor doesn't really test it, right? The one who's really actually doing good science in terms of a hypothesis, in terms of measurement, in terms of expected outcomes, I mean, that's Klausner. And he's the one that, is kind of viewed as a little bit out there, because he's like, well, how do I know what plants feel like? It wouldn't be, maybe we don't call it pain. And then he like invents some words for it.
Yeah.
Essentially, there's a quote in there, right? And then he goes into the garden and his neighbor's cutting the daisies and he hears them screaming in pain. Now, from a firsthand experience, right? Because firsthand experience is hard to argue with, right? Because you have those people that say, I know what I saw. I know what I know. And yes, memory is malleable and it's difficult to come past that. But you have Klausner, who is arguably doing a pretty good job, I think, of trying to detect the undetectable. And he thinks he's discovered a sentience of some sort, a pain receptor. I don't want to call it a nervous system, but he's discovered some method that these plants can respond to outside stimuli, and we can measure that they actually do have pain or a response to it.
And Klausner is a great scientist, that he goes through the scientific method many times. He's trying to repeat the process because he asks the neighbor to cut again so he can observe again, just like a scientist would. And then he does it himself. And then the next day he goes out and he takes an axe and chops a tree and gets similar results. And he even says, maybe this isn't how we perceive pain, the same that them, but something here is happening. I don't know what it is. He makes up the fun words, but he says something is going on, and I don't know what it is, but I'm trying to measure it. And then, I feel like the whole story just revolves around Klausner's mental well-being. And then on top of that is what I kind of took the story for was this man versus nature of that, we have kind of taken ourselves out of nature. I mean, a lot of people, describe us as that we're, the dominant species on the planet. We're the dominant primate. And we've removed ourselves from nature, right? We lived in our little houses, and we cut our grass. We are very different than every other living thing on this planet. And Klausner is tapping back into nature of something that we've purposely removed ourselves from for a long time, hundreds and hundreds of years.
Here's what I struggled with that. Is Klausner, I agree, is like tapping back into nature on some level, right? He's like, you gotta hear this. This exists. This is real. Like plants can feel, they can hear us, and that's where I kind of got like that vegan, vegetarian argument from like, like if you can stop suffering in another creature, shouldn't you stop suffering is one argument. And that's why some people have decided that becoming a vegetarian to them is more ethical, right? Because they don't want to cause pain and suffering. And others are like, okay, well, what if we can butcher the animal without pain and suffering? Would you then eat the meat, right? Like I don't want to go down that route for the story because I don't think that's where he was going. But let's say you discover that you can cause pain to daisies by cutting them, by trimming them, right? Even though it might be good for them, right? Like the same way that I might make my son cry sometimes. He doesn't like it when I have to correct him, but I think it's for the good of him, realizing his place in society, thinking about others and trying to make him a better human being, right? He has this empathy. First of all, do we agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. So he has this empathy. I was so confused that if this were true empathy and he really did kind of like feel for these plants in all the ways that he could demo this to the doctor, why cause a life-threatening gash cutting down a tree, like the Widowmaker branch coming down, smashing the machine, very violent, right? Of all the different ways, why choose such a violent way to a probably hundreds, if not thousands of year old tree, if you truly did have empathy for these creatures? And I think it's interesting the length he went to, that if this really were a scientific man versus nature thing, he sure is ethically probably pushing himself pretty far if he does feel for these plants, if he believes that they actually do have feelings and are crying out in pain.
That's true. He has personified plants. He does question it, I think, but I think that he's looking for an extreme reaction to see whether he was hearing this through his imagination. Think of, you brought up your son. If you give him a pinch, it's stop, Dad. Maybe it's something little. But if, you cut or broke a bone, the extreme is going to show you more results. And I think that's what Klausner is trying to do, is see those extremes. And I'm not saying it's right that he does it, but it does show that human versus nature element that we are always trying to control our environments. Again, we're in our houses with air conditioning. We're literally conditioning the air to suit our own needs. And many scientific breakthroughs have been to the detriment of this planet so we could better ourselves. And that's what Klausner has done.
Well, I wonder, that's a really good point. I wonder, okay, so if we're talking about not being able to detect the undetectable, let's say in reality, we do learn, whether it's, you call it pain or some other word, for example, let's say you discover plants can experience pain, right? Would that stop human beings from causing harm to plants? And I don't think it would,
No.
Because we obviously,
I love hamburgers.
It's pretty obvious there. Right. But here's the thing. I think one of the big differentiators between human beings, animals, and plants is choice, right? We know animals can experience pain, right? Like there's no arguing there, and we still do it anyways. But at the same time, like the morals, I guess choice was kind of a loose word there, but plants or animals don't have like that higher moralistic reasoning and logic that we have. What if you discover, in terms of in the spirit of detecting the undetectable, what if you discover plants have that they do have an ethical need, and the way that they choose to grow or exist, they do consider others in that concept and don't want to cause harm to others? Would that change how you should or could treat plants potentially?
You would have a lot of angry vegetarians and vegans that would die.
Well, what am I supposed to eat now? What am I supposed to survive off the sun? Like,
it's funny that you say that, because in the Superpowers book that I've mentioned before, not for a long time, that one of the superpowers, the lady is connected to nature and can control plants and stuff. And they're at lunch one day and she's eating this big steak, and one of her friends sits down with a salad and she's like, "You are so cruel," and like shoves her plate away and gets up and leaves because the girl's eating a salad. So, it's perspective, I think, a lot of the time, of course. But yeah, I mean, when we give human qualities to non-human objects, it's going to change your perception of everything and your feelings. And that's not wrong. And I think that's what Klausner's kind of done here, is he's looking beyond just human sight. And is there more? And I think that he's trying to prove that there is.
All right, so moving to the end, you have a big question mark, right? In Roald Dahl fashion, I think this was a kind of a Roald Dahl ending in some regards. Like, you're right, there wasn't a big reveal, but it is very Dahl to say, is this man crazy, or did he actually hear it? Because the doctor was kind of wishy-washy on whether he actually heard something before that machine was destroyed.
Yeah, so only Klausner actually, quote, heard the plants feeling, quote, pain or discomfort or anything. Nobody else did. So the ending leaves it very ambiguous. Is he crazy, or did he make a scientific discovery? Is he a genius?
Let us know if you've detected the undetectable, and did you think Klausner actually did detect pain, and would you change your behavior? That's a hard question. Something to think about over the next few days, and hopefully, that's what literature can do, is challenge us in our day-to-day lives to think about things like this. Like, there are lots of things we don't know, right? So let's be humble and open to the idea of changing how we look at the current world. Hope you guys had a great takeaway from this story, because I don't know, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a great story. Roald Dahl playlist down below. Leave us a little plant emoji if you enjoyed today's discussion but aren't sure what to add. My name's been Una. Peace.
Peace.